So you just got your DSLR and you're really excited about taking great photos. You're looking at all the portraits online with the blurry backgrounds, but you have no idea where to start or how to even do that. Well, in today's video, we're going to learn how you can blur the background. So in this video, I'm going to be using the least amount of technical terms as possible. The reason being that this video is really going to be focused on the person that's just getting started on photography or the casual person who just wants to get blurry backgrounds. And the reason I give that disclaimer is because there are certain people in the photography community who can be a little bit dogmatic as far as what the technical terms are and what your settings should be whenever you're photographing. For example, we're not going to debate how you pronounce bokeh or bokeh. Nobody cares, really. You can pronounce it either way and still be a crappy person and a crappy photographer. Now, there are general rules to follow, but like any art medium, rules are meant to be learned so that they can be broken for subjective expression. But we'll get more into that in later videos. So there are three things that we're going to be going over today. That's aperture, sensor size, and the quickest camera modes to get you started. So what is aperture? To put it simply, aperture is the space through which light passes in your lens. These little blades here are your aperture blades. So how does aperture affect your image? So here's where we get a little bit technical, but I promise I'm gonna keep it as simple as I can for you guys. So here's a formula that you can take a screenshot of so you can remember. A small f number equals a large aperture, and a large f number equals a small aperture. When it comes to choosing a lens, you want one with a small f number or a large aperture, because this large aperture is what gives you those smooth, blurry backgrounds. I found that in my experience and in my preference, lenses with the aperture f2.8 and lower, so f2.8, f1.8, f1.4, those are usually the lenses that are going to give you those blurry backgrounds. And so here's an example. I'm using the Sigma 35mm, and we'll get into focal length in a later video, but it has an aperture range between 1.4 and f16. This is at f4, small aperture, and this is at f1.4, large aperture. Another factor in getting blurry backgrounds is your sensor size. So I wish I had like the technical science of why this is a factor, but I hope you can just take it as fact because I do have proof. Check this out. In this example, I'm using an iPhone that has a relative focal length of 29mm at f2.2. So that's a fairly large aperture, right? But the sensor is very small compared to the Nikon D600's full frame sensor with a focal length of the 28mm at f2.2. So the same f number, right? Aperture number f2.2. But check out the difference side by side. You can see how the larger sensor of the Nikon Z600, which is full frame, renders a more blurry background than the iPhone 6s. And yeah, I do need to update, but I mean, I'll do that later on. So you know that you need a large aperture or a small f number and a pretty decent sized camera sensor. So what sort of modes should you be using on your DSLR? I found that in my opinion, the quickest way to get you to start taking photos with blurry backgrounds is in the manual mode in your camera mode dial or the aperture mode. And there's like literally a mode that prioritizes the aperture that you want. So that's pretty cool. So if you're just starting out, I'm going to refer you to aperture priority mode. The reason being that it has less of a learning curve than manual mode does. You can find aperture priority on your mode dial. It's usually labeled as A for aperture. And once you have that selected, you just simply choose your aperture and the camera will choose automatically your other settings, your shutter speed and your ISO. But just be careful because when the camera chooses the settings automatically for you, you tend to not have the best results. So even though aperture priority is used by a lot of professionals and many photographers use it, most photographers usually work their way over to manual mode, which is labeled M on your camera mode dial. Manual mode gives you the most control because you're choosing your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. These things I can cover in a later video. But for the most part, these two modes are the quickest way for you to get into having those blurry backgrounds and taking photos of people, of still objects, and just having that sweet, sweet bokeh. That's right, I said bokeh. Oh, I'm gonna get a lot of hate for that. So you learned what aperture is, how the sensor size affects your image, and which modes you can use to get you started. I hope this was helpful for you and that you can get started right away. If you're posting your work on Instagram, go ahead and follow and tag me at Juan Said Photo. I'd love to see your work. Also, if you are interested in learning how to edit your photos, there are many different ways. Be sure to subscribe, so I'm going to be putting out a video on an overview of the different ways that you can edit your photos once you've taken them. And be sure to check out all the links down below. I have the gear that I use and also the presets that I'm selling, just so that way you can get a head start on editing your photos in case you don't know where to start. Thanks again for watching the video. I hope this was helpful. If there's any questions that you have or any comments, leave them down below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.